and some ability to connect them together across this environment that you guys are talking about. And you've got to work out all these policy issues. And so the infamous white paper was drafted and started floating around. And we handed it to the privacy advocates and the lawyers, and they said, we have no idea what you want to do. This doesn't make sense to us. Come back to us when you have something. We handed it to the mission folks, the gun toters, and they said, I don't know what you're talking about. We handed it to the chiefs, and they started talking about, well, I really need this over here. I don't need that. And the policymakers kept on saying, no, we want to do this. We want to make this happen. So this was an area where IT practices, specifically the NEAM IAPD process, mattered in the end to policymakers and advocates. So let me explain what happened. NEAM actually took the white paper and built an IAPD. And they did it, they just did it. And there's folks in this room, I can actually see some of them, who actually were part of that process, and they deserve a lot of credit for this. And they just put it together. And I remember I took a lot of heat from the policy folks and the business folks who were saying, you can't do that. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what's going on. And my answer was, well, then fix it. Make it better. Take what we've done and make it better. But we started putting the discipline down. We started saying, here's information flow diagrams. Here's the data we want to share. You know what? The privacy folks really want to see what data elements we're talking about. If they're not correct, fix it and let's share it. Here's the flow. Here's who's going to see what, when. Here's how it actually transcribes itself around. Not from a technical, here's the 10 days, the stack, and here's the logical model of the data elements. But here's the actual flow of who gets to see what, and here's the business process associated with that. All of a sudden, we had major movements on this issue. We had the privacy advocates, and this happened earlier this year. The ACLU published a press release complimenting the federal government on its, and the IAPD specifically, on the release of the new National SAR Initiative IAPD, the inclusion of privacy elements, the identification of important elements with regard to sharing and privacy. I mean, that just blows you out of the water. And then we had the business process folks saying, no, this is exactly what we need to do. And the folks who ran the actual departments were sitting down and saying, this is where my officers need to be trained. This is the part they need to be trained on. LA took off and started doing the training themselves. The self-generation, the self-growth, the self-improvement process started kicking in. And next thing you know, they're ahead of us, and we're running forward to catch up with them to kind of make sure we're on the same page with what they're doing. This was an area where adding a simple discipline known as the IAPD that NEAM had started has done massive things to improve the federal government. It has done massive way, and the state and local governments in their ability to protect us against attacks. And they actually have now, different instances where they can talk about suspicious activity reports on the local level that have now been deemed, okay, that's important to be shared with the national level, and have been led to case investigations and things that have happened on the national level because they've been able to tie those together. So we actually are having a system that operates and works. So that's an area where I think a lot of folks here deserve recognition and compliment, and also understand that to me is very powerful when you start applying that to other business practices and start saying, I need to build this technology, but how do I drive what's in that technology? And that's what the IAPD process has allowed us to do. I also want to talk a little bit, changing the subject, on something called UCOR, because it's very important to us, the PMISC, because our job is to increase cause information sharing to happen across multiples of community of interest, including defense and intelligence and diplomacy and law enforcement and homeland security. And one of the areas that we've seen some movement and we think is very positive has been the synchronization of NEAM's who, what, when, where elements and UCOR 2.0's core elements. And so now we have a basic level of understanding inside these systems that at least you're sharing some set of elements with the DoD community. If they're using UCOR, they line up with the NEAM community, and there needs to be more of that. There needs to be more elements where we're seeing more government-wide harmonization of data standards. We're not saying that in those different extensions in those areas that we have folks working in different portions and pieces that are very domain-specific, those different domains, those should be harmonized everywhere. We are saying, though, there needs to be some basic set of elements that's harmonized. And there's a lot of challenges there. You're dealing with lots of different cultures and lots of different organizations with their ways of doing things, lots of different experiences. But it would be nice to be able to say data collected at data.gov is in for basic elements, who, what, when, where, is in some standard format that we can deal with and all of us can consume it the same way. The last thing I want to talk about is the future, and talk about a project that we've got underway at the PMISC's office with NIST and some other agencies. DOJ, I think, is actually going to participate in some of this too. It's around the concept of privilege and access management. What's happened in the government in some other areas has been the movement towards common credentials, common cards, common ways of identifying people, some attempt to standardize identity management. Lots of attempts, actually. I shouldn't say it that way. I don't mean that. What we're trying to do now is we're noticing that in the exchange of information, so where NEAM is most successful, when you're exchanging information, it's hard unless you have very specific, the IAPD talks about, okay, this information is being shared for this purpose and this audience is allowed to see it and this is what they're allowed to do with it. That comes in the IAPD, but that has to then be built into the system. And it also then is fixed into the system. It would be really nice if I could wrap around my information some of the requirements for access, some of the attributes of those people I want to have allowed to see the system. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to say, during this type of event, when we change our concern about the country, suddenly the policy changes and these people, all these folks are allowed to see information. When that event changes, the policy reverts back to its original shape. And so instead of having new systems built or having to just throw open the doors, you can say the data we've already shared with you that only has been exposed to these folks in your office is now open to a broad set of analysts because we're trying to cover some national security event. Up and down, you can move your policy around. So adding that privilege management piece is very important to us in realizing an environment of sharing. And so that's part of that semantic harmonization, because what becomes important technically, we're working on the technical parts of that with NIST and trying to standardize that privilege management. But the other dimension of this problem, which I think is much more significant, is the semantic harmonization of attributes. What is a law enforcement officer? That's not a common definition across this country. And when you suddenly say, I'm sharing this information to law enforcement officers, do you realize who that actually means? And you have to actually work those issues out. So I think some of the challenges that we're going to get into as we start moving forward into NEAM is going to be around both this business process portion of the IAPD development and harmonization there, but also around starting to ask the questions of do we know what those words actually mean when we go to code this up? Because the IT systems aren't as flexible as we are as human beings. So that's my kind of setup as where we're at with the PMISE, and I'll wait for any questions.
Thanks, Clark. Next to join us is Jim Pengel, who comes to us all the way from the lovely state of Wisconsin, where Jim had responsibility for development and shepherding a number of statewide systems there that were instrumental in the development of NEAM across the state. Jim is also an IGES Fellow, and anybody who's involved with the NBAC and NTAC committees here, Jim is no stranger to you. So with that, let me bring Jim up, who will talk on the governance.
That's one of the nicest things somebody said about me this week, that I'm not a stranger. So thanks. And thank you, Phil and Clark. I think the comments that I have for you feed in nicely and kind of feed off nicely of what you guys talked about. So I do have PowerPoint slides because it's better than looking at my picture up there on the big screen for 15, 20 minutes. So hopefully a little diversion here. I also have some pictures just to kind of help illustrate. And what you're going to see is as I said, what I'm going to do is sort of illustrate some of the things that Phil and Clark had talked about. And what governance is really about is thinking about how these individual activities of building exchanges, of using NEAM to improve information sharing, how all that stuff rolls up across this country into something that can continue to move forward and improve as we go forward. So first of all, let's start with probably one of the more easily recognizable NEAM pictures. Is everybody familiar with this graphic? Oh, come on, you need to stretch. Show of hands. Who's seen this graphic before? Get some exercise. Okay, there we go. Clark talked a lot about IEPDs. That stands for Information Exchange Package Documentation. And this picture if you haven't already, and if you don't already know all the steps involved in this process, you will by the end of this week. And all it really says, all you really need to know, is what Clark was talking about, and that's that the process of using NEAM is driven by the business needs out there in the community to share information. This starts with scenario planning and business analysis, and it ends with implementing something and improving it on an ongoing basis in a real information sharing environment. But let's start thinking about this at a national perspective. Phil talked about a number of things that are going on in ICE. Clark alluded to things happening in the intelligence community and in law enforcement. And I'm probably going to get some arguments about whether some of these things make NEAM unique, but I think it's some of the things that give us an opportunity to tackle this problem at a national scope. One is the fact that those are all little exchange IEPD pictures, but as Phil and Clark talked about, individual exchange projects that they're working on, you've got to recognize that this is happening many, many times across the country, all over state and local government, across many different areas of federal government. The challenge here really for NEAM is to take account of all these different needs, right, for information sharing in the justice community, in the immigration community, in maritime domain awareness. You might learn about some of the things that are happening in terms of coastal surveillance. Now, Phil is good at hammering on the emphasis on the exchange. He says it's not about the NEAM data model. It's not about whether it's 2.0 or 2.1. What really matters is the exchange. And what we're seeing, this conference, this next 2.5 days, is really a testament to just how many exchanges there are out there, right, and how complex this could become with so many different information exchanges being implemented across the country, across these different disciplines, which is why, as Clark described, the other emphasis that is part of NEAM is so important. That's that emphasis on semantics. And Clark said it much better than I could. It's really about creating this shared understanding of what is an arrest, what is a cargo container, what is a person encounter. NEAM doesn't work at a national level if we don't have a mechanism, right, for getting to a way that this entire community, everybody that's represented in this room, I mean, collectively we represent a much larger community across this nation. NEAM doesn't work unless we all understand, and we all call a dog, and we all understand what each other means when we're talking about a dog, or an arrest, or an encounter. That challenge gets even more complicated when we think about what NEAM is trying to do in terms of going across domains. Clark mentioned GJXDM. Many of you are familiar with the fact that this program started in the justice community, Global Justice XML, and quickly the justice folks realized that it was imperative to expand across the rest of the Homeland Security community. So you'll see this rose petal diagram at the top a number of times this week too. And what you really need to know there about that diagram is that represents all of these different communities of interest, whether it's immigration and enforcement, the intelligence community, law enforcement. Each one of those has its unique set of needs, has some unique semantics, but also has shares with those other domains a lot of what we call the core semantics, people, locations, things like that. From this challenge now, from tackling information sharing and from a national perspective and a cross-domain perspective, what I want to talk to you about really briefly today is really what it takes to govern this entire project and hopefully give you a sense of what your role is in helping this governance process. So clearly one of the first things for managing any project is clear strategic direction. But as we've been talking about so far today, that needs to be balanced with the need for all this grassroots development, all the things that are happening across this country to inform that strategic direction and the day-to-day operations. Of course, we also have to make sure that we coordinate and manage those day-to-day operations and keep them aligned with both strategic direction and what's happening across this national community.